The room fell silent as I shared what my father told me on his deathbed. His weathered hands gripped mine, and with tears in his eyes he whispered, "Son, I spent my whole life running from pain, only to realize that every heartbreak was trying to teach me something beautiful." Those words haunted me for years, until I finally understood their profound truth, the very truth I'm sharing with you today. You see, we're all carrying something heavy. Right now, in this room, there are dreams that feel crushed, relationships that have crumbled, and hopes that seem forever lost. I can feel the weight of your struggles, just as you can probably sense mine. But what if, and this is the question that changed everything for me, what if every single hardship we face isn't a roadblock, but a gateway to something extraordinary? Let me tell you about Maria, a woman I met last year who lost everything in a house fire. Her home, photographs, family heirlooms, all reduced to ashes in a matter of hours. When I first met her, she was living in a small motel room with her 2 children, trying to piece together what remained of their lives. Most people would expect her story to be one of despair, but Maria's journey reveals something remarkable about the human spirit. In the 3 months after the fire, Maria told me something that stopped me in my tracks. She said, "You know what? Before the fire, I was sleepwalking through life. I had a beautiful house filled with things, but I wasn't really living. Now, every morning when I wake up and see my children's faces, I feel truly alive. We have less, but we laugh more. We cry." Maria's words touch on a fundamental truth about life that most of us resist. Our deepest pain often contains the seeds of our greatest growth. Think about your own life for a moment. Remember that time when everything seemed to fall apart? That relationship that ended, leaving you feeling hollow inside? That career setback that made you question everything you'd worked for? I want you to close your eyes for a moment and really feel those memories. Feel the weight of that pain, the uncertainty, the fear. Now, without pushing those feelings away, I want you to look a little deeper. What did those experiences teach you about yourself? What strengths did you discover that you never knew you had? You see, life has this remarkable way of using our hardships as chisel strokes, carefully sculpting us into something more beautiful than we could have imagined. But here's the catch. This only happens when we stop seeing our struggles as our enemies. I remember a time in my own life when I hit rock bottom. My business had failed, my savings were depleted, and my confidence was shattered. I spent countless nights staring at the ceiling, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. But in that darkness, something unexpected happened. As I lay there stripped of all the external markers of success I'd relied on, I began to hear a quiet voice inside me, a voice I'd been too busy to listen to for years. That voice led me to question everything I thought I knew about success and fulfillment. It made me realize that I'd been chasing someone else's definition of achievement, living by rules that weren't my own. My business failure, as painful as it was, became the wake-up call I needed to realign my life with my true values. This is what hardships do. They strip away the superficial and force us to confront what's real, what's true, what matters most. They're like spiritual sandpaper, rough and uncomfortable, but ultimately revealing something more beautiful underneath. But let's be honest, this isn't easy wisdom to embrace when you're in the middle of your own storm. When you're hurting, the last thing you want to hear is that your pain has a purpose. So I'm not going to tell you to just think positive or find the silver lining. Instead, I'm inviting you to consider a different way of relating to your challenges. Imagine for a moment that every hardship that comes your way isn't a random act of cruelty from the universe, but rather a carefully chosen teacher arriving at exactly the right moment to help you grow into who you're meant to become. What if that person who broke your heart came into your life to teach you about self-worth? What if that job loss was meant to redirect you toward your true calling? What if that illness was meant to teach you about the preciousness of health and time? I've spent years studying the lives of people who've faced incredible adversity and emerged not just surviving but transformed. And I've noticed something fascinating. It's not the intensity of the hardship that determines its impact on our lives, but rather our relationship to it. Some people face devastating losses and find ways to create meaning and beauty from their pain, while the difference lies in one crucial understanding. Life's hardships aren't happening to us, they're happening for us. Every challenge, every setback, every heartbreak is an invitation to grow, to learn, to become more than we are right now. Think about a pearl for a moment. Do you know how a pearl is formed? It begins with an irritant, a grain of sand that finds its way into an oyster's shell. The oyster's natural response is to coat this irritant with layer upon layer of nacre, eventually creating something beautiful from what was initially causing pain. Your hardships are like that grain of sand. They might be irritating, uncomfortable, even painful, but they have the potential to transform into something precious if you respond to them with wisdom and patience. When I walk through hospitals, I often meet people facing the greatest challenges of their lives. Last month, I met a young man named James who had just received news that would change his life forever. At 32, he was diagnosed with a condition that would gradually rob him of his ability to walk. As an avid mountain climber and outdoor enthusiast, his world seemed to crumble around him. Most people would expect James to be angry, bitter, perhaps even desperate. Instead, when I sat with him, he shared something profound. You know, he said, for the first time in my life, I'm actually present for every step I take. Each morning when my feet touch the ground, I feel grateful. I notice things I never saw before, the way sunlight plays on my bedroom wall, the sound of my daughter's laughter, the taste of my morning coffee. I always thought I was living life to the fullest when I was climbing mountains. Now I realize I was just chasing the next peak. James's story illustrates a paradox that many of us struggle to accept. Sometimes our greatest limitations can become our greatest teachers. When life strips away what we thought we needed to be happy, it often reveals what truly matters. But here's the crucial part. This transformation doesn't happen automatically. It requires a fundamental shift in how we view our challenges. Think about the most difficult period in your life. Maybe you're going through it right now. What if, instead of asking, why is this happening to me, you asked, what is this trying to teach me? This simple shift in perspective can change everything. It moves us from being victims of our circumstances to being students of life. I remember working with a group of people who had lost their jobs during a major economic downturn. One woman, Sarah, had been an executive for 20 years. Her identity was completely wrapped up in her career. When she lost her job, she didn't just lose a paycheck, she lost her sense of self. For months, she felt lost, questioning her worth, her abilities, everything she thought she knew about herself. But then something remarkable happened. In the silence that followed her job loss, when she'd no longer had meetings to attend or emails to answer, she began to hear something she'd been ignoring for decades, her own heart. She remembered how, as a young girl, she'd dreamed of being an artist. She'd pushed that dream aside for a practical career. But now, in what seemed like her darkest hour, that old passion began to resurface. Today, Sarah runs a successful art therapy program for troubled youth. She tells me that losing her job wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of a much better one. I had to lose everything I thought I wanted, she says, to find what I actually needed. This brings us to a crucial truth about hardships. They often force us to question our fundamental assumptions about life, happiness, and success. When everything you've built falls apart, you have to ask yourself, what am I really building for? When relationships crumble, you have to ask, what does love really mean to me? When health fails, you have to ask, what truly gives my life meaning? These questions aren't comfortable. They're not meant to be. They're meant to shake us awake, to force us to look deeper than we've ever looked before. Because here's the truth, most of us sleepwalk through life until pain wakes us up. We follow prescribed paths, chase prescribed dreams, live prescribed lives until something breaks down and forces us to question everything. But what if we didn't wait for life to break us open? What if we could learn to see our daily challenges, the small frustrations, the minor setbacks, the unexpected obstacles, as opportunities for growth? What if every traffic jam became a chance to practice patience? Every difficult conversation an opportunity to develop compassion? Every mistake a lesson in humility? I worked with a man once who had been angry his entire life. Everything was a source of frustration: his job, his family, the weather, the news. Then one day his grandson asked him a simple question. "Grandpa, why are you always mad?" Those innocent words hit him like a thunderbolt. He realized he'd spent decades poisoning his own experience of life, turning every challenge into a reason for bitterness. That question became the beginning of his transformation. He started doing something remarkable. Whenever he felt anger rising, he would ask himself, what am I trying to control that I can't control? What am I refusing to accept? These questions became his pathway to peace, not because they made his problems disappear, but because they helped him see his challenges differently. This is the secret that every spiritual teacher, every wise person throughout history has tried to share with us. Our suffering doesn't come from our hardships themselves, but from our resistance to them. When we fight against what life presents us, we create additional layers of pain. When we learn to meet our challenges with curiosity instead of resistance, something magical happens. They begin to transform us. But let me be clear, this isn't about passive acceptance or resignation. It's not about letting life push you around. It's about engaging with your challenges from a place of wisdom rather than reaction. It's about asking better questions when life gets hard. Instead of why me, ask, what now? Instead of how can I avoid this, ask, how can I grow from this? I've seen people transform the most devastating losses into sources of strength and wisdom. Parents who've lost children becoming advocates for child safety. Cancer survivors creating support networks for others facing the same battle. People who faced addiction building programs to help others recover. These people didn't choose their hardships, but they chose what to do with them. This is what I mean when I say hardships can lead to a fulfilling life. Not because the pain itself is good, but because it can wake us up to deeper truths about ourselves and what really matters. It can strip away our illusions and force us to build something more authentic and meaningful from the ground up. Every morning as the sun rises, somewhere in the world, someone is facing what feels like an insurmountable challenge. They're sitting in a doctor's office receiving life-changing news, or watching their life's work crumble, or saying goodbye to someone they love for the last time. In these moments, transformation seems impossible. The pain feels too raw, too real, too overwhelming. Well, I remember sitting with Anna, a woman who had lost her husband suddenly in a car accident. She told me something that changed how I understand grief. She said, "Everyone keeps telling me time heals all wounds. But that's not true. Time doesn't heal anything. It's what we do with the time that matters. Some days I feel like I'm drowning in grief, but other days I catch glimpses of who I'm becoming because of it. I'm softer in some ways, stronger in others. I notice things about life I never saw before. Anna's words touch on something profound about the nature of personal transformation through hardship. It's not a passive process. It's not about waiting for the pain to pass or for time to work its magic. It's about actively engaging with our challenges, about being willing to be changed by them. There was a successful businessman I worked with who lost everything in a financial crisis. His company, his home, his reputation, all gone. He spent months in a deep depression, barely able to get out of bed. But one day he noticed something strange. His teenage son, who had always been distant and rebellious, started spending more time with him. Without the distraction of work and success, he was finally present enough to build a real relationship with his child. This man told me something remarkable. I always thought I was building a legacy through my business. Now I realize I was missing the most important legacy of all, the relationship with my son. My financial ruin became the foundation for something priceless. Today, he runs a much smaller business, but he measures success differently. His priority isn't the bottom line anymore. It's the quality of his relationships and the impact he has on others. What these stories teach us is that hardships have a way of realigning our priorities. They shake us out of our comfortable assumptions and force us to question what truly matters. But here's the key. This only happens when we're willing to stay present with our pain long enough to learn from it. Most of us have developed sophisticated strategies for avoiding pain. We stay busy, we distract ourselves, we numb ourselves with endless entertainment or social media or work. We do anything to avoid sitting with the discomfort of our challenges. But what if our pain has something to teach us? What if, instead of running from it, we learn to listen to it? I worked with a woman who struggled with chronic illness for years. She tried everything to fix her condition, to get back to her old life. But one day she had a profound realization. Her illness wasn't just taking things away from her, it was also giving her something. It was teaching her to slow down, to be gentle with herself, to accept help from others. It was showing her a different way of being in the world. She told me, I used to think strength meant pushing through, never showing weakness. Now I know true strength is about being vulnerable, about accepting your limitations, about letting others in. Her illness became her teacher, showing her aspects of life and love she might never have discovered otherwise. This is what I mean when I talk about hardships leading to a fulfilling life. It's not that the hardships themselves are good. They're often painful, challenging, and unwanted. But they can become doorways to deeper understanding, greater compassion, and more authentic ways of living. Think about a time when you faced a significant challenge. Maybe you're in the middle of one right now. What if this challenge isn't just a problem to be solved, but an invitation to grow? What if it's trying to teach you something about yourself, about life, about what really matters? I've noticed that people who emerge from hardships with greater wisdom and strength share certain qualities. They don't deny their pain or try to rush through it. They don't pretend everything is fine when it isn't. Instead, they develop what I call transformative awareness. This transformative awareness isn't about positive thinking or denying reality. It's about developing a deeper relationship with life itself. It's about understanding that our challenges, as painful as they may be, are part of our growth. They're not obstacles on our path. They are the path. Consider the story of David, a young athlete who suffered a spinal injury that left him paralyzed. In the early days after his accident, he was consumed by anger and despair. He couldn't imagine finding any meaning or purpose in his new reality. But as he began to work with other people with spinal injuries, something shifted. Today, David runs a foundation that helps people with spinal injuries rebuild their lives. He told me something profound. I wouldn't choose to go through what happened to me, but I also wouldn't change it. My injury broke me open and showed me who I really am. It showed me what I'm capable of. It gave my life a purpose I never could have imagined. This is the paradox of transformation through hardship. We don't have to like our challenges to learn from them. We don't have to pretend our pain isn't real to find meaning in it. We just have to stay open to the possibility that our hardships might be leading us somewhere important, somewhere we need to go for our own growth. There's a story about a group of prisoners in a concentration camp during World War II who survived their ordeal by creating an invisible university. In the midst of unimaginable suffering, they taught each other everything they knew: languages, mathematics, philosophy, music. They refused to let their circumstances define the contents of their minds. Years later, when asked how they managed to maintain their humanity in such inhuman conditions, one survivor said, "They could control our bodies, but they couldn't control what we did with our suffering." This story speaks to something fundamental about the human spirit, our capacity to find meaning even in our darkest moments. But it also raises an important question. How do we actually do this? How do we transform our hardships into sources of growth and meaning? I work with a woman named Rachel who lost her daughter to cancer. For months after her daughter's death, she could barely function. The pain was overwhelming, all doing. But one day, while going through her daughter's things, she found a diary. In it, her daughter had written about her dreams of helping other sick children feel less afraid in hospitals. Those words became a seed of purpose for Rachel. Today, Rachel runs a program that brings art and music to children's hospital wards. She tells me, "I carry my grief with me every day. It hasn't gotten smaller, I've grown bigger around it. My daughter's death broke my heart open, and in that brokenness I found a way to love more widely than I ever thought possible." This is what I mean when I say hardships can lead to a fulfilling life. Not because they're good or desirable, but because they can break us open in ways that allow more light to enter. They can expand our capacity for understanding, for compassion, for meaningful action in the world. But here's the crucial part. This transformation doesn't happen automatically. It requires a conscious choice to engage with our pain in a different way. When hardship strikes, we have three basic options. We can let it break us down, we can just survive it, or we can let it break us open to something larger than ourselves. I remember working with a man who had been betrayed by his business partner. He lost not just his company, but his trust in people. For months, he was consumed by bitterness and thoughts of revenge. But one day, he had a realization that changed everything. He said, "I suddenly understood that by staying angry, I was letting my betrayer control my life long after the actual betrayal had ended. My anger wasn't protecting me, it was imprisoning me." This man's journey from betrayal to wisdom teaches us something important about transformation through hardship. It often begins with a shift in perspective, from asking, "Why did this happen to me?" to asking, "What can I create from this experience?" Think about the challenges you're facing right now. What if they're not just problems to be solved, but invitations to evolve? What if every difficulty, every setback, every loss is actually life asking you to become more than you are right now? I've noticed that people who transform their hardships into stepping stones for growth share certain practices. First, they allow themselves to feel their pain fully. They don't deny it or try to rush through it. Second, they maintain a sense of curiosity about their experience, asking questions like, What can I learn from this? And how might this be serving my growth? Third, they look for ways to use their experience to help others. There was a teacher I worked with who struggled with severe anxiety. For years, she saw it as her greatest weakness, something to hide from her students. But one day, she decided to be honest about her struggles. To her surprise, this vulnerability created a profound connection with her students, especially those who were dealing with their own anxiety. She told me something remarkable. I used to think I had to overcome my anxiety to be a good teacher. Now I understand that my struggles with anxiety have made me a better teacher. They've taught me patience, empathy, and the importance of creating a safe space for others to be themselves. This is a crucial truth about hardships. They often give us exactly what we need to serve others who are facing similar challenges. Our wounds, when transformed through understanding and compassion, become sources of wisdom and healing for others. Consider the story of Michael, a recovering addict who now counsels others struggling with addiction. He told me, "For years I saw my addiction as my greatest shame. Now I understand it was preparing me for my life's work. Every moment of suffering, every failed attempt at recovery, every rock bottom, they all gave me the understanding I need to help others find their way out of darkness." This is the alchemy of transformation through hardship. Our greatest struggles can become our greatest gifts to the world. But this only happens when we're willing to stay present with our challenges long enough to discover their deeper purpose. Think about the hardships you've faced in your life. What wisdom have they given you? What strengths have they developed in you? What understanding have they granted you that you couldn't have gained any other way? These aren't just rhetorical questions, they're keys to unlocking the transformative potential of your challenges. In the quietest moments of our lives, when we're truly honest with ourselves, we often discover that the experiences we once wished we could erase have become the foundation of our strength. I'm reminded of a conversation I had with an elderly woman who survived the loss of her entire family in a natural disaster. Years later, she created a community center that became a sanctuary for hundreds of displaced people. She told me something I'll never forget. "For years, I thought I had to heal completely before I could help others. Then I realized that my wounds were precisely what allowed me to understand their pain. My brokenness became my gift to the world." Her words capture a profound truth about the relationship between suffering and fulfillment. Our hardships don't just change us, they give us the tools to change the world. Think about the most difficult experiences you've lived through. Notice how they've shaped your understanding of life, your capacity for empathy, your ability to connect with others who are suffering. These aren't just painful memories. They're the raw materials from which you've built your wisdom. I remember sitting with a group of parents who had all lost children to different circumstances. One father said something that struck me deeply. "Before this happened, I lived on the surface of life. I was successful, happy, but somehow not fully alive. Now I feel everything more deeply. Not just the pain, but also the joy, the love, the beauty. My son's death broke me open to the full spectrum of what it means to be human." This is what hardships can do for us when we allow them to. They can break us open to a fuller experience of life. Not because the pain itself is good, but because it can strip away our illusions and connect us to what's real, what's true. But here's what I've learned from working with thousands of people facing life's greatest challenges. The transformation of hardship into fulfillment isn't something that happens to us, it's something we actively participate in. It requires courage to stay present with our pain instead of running from it. It requires wisdom to look for the lessons hidden within our struggles. And most importantly, It requires heart to use our hard-won insights to help others. Consider the metaphor of a forest fire. In the immediate aftermath, everything appears destroyed. But forest fires, as devastating as they are, play a crucial role in the ecosystem. They clear away dead undergrowth, return nutrients to the soil, and create the conditions for new growth. Some seeds actually require the intense heat of a fire to germinate. Our hardships can function in a similar way. I worked with a woman who lost her high-powered corporate career due to burnout. She spent months in a deep depression, feeling like a failure. But in the silence that followed her breakdown, she began to hear something she'd been ignoring for years, a calling to work with troubled youth. Today, she runs a successful program helping teenagers find their path in life. She told me, "My burnout wasn't a failure, it was a course correction. I had to lose the life I thought I wanted to find the life I was meant to live." This is the invitation that Hardship extends to all of us, to use our challenges as catalysts for growth, as doorways to deeper meaning, as opportunities to contribute to the healing of others. But this invitation requires something from us. It requires us to shift our relationship with difficulty, to stop seeing our challenges as obstacles to our fulfillment, and start seeing them as the path to our fulfillment. Remember the story I shared at the beginning about my father's last words? He said that every heartbreak was trying to teach him something beautiful. It took me years to understand what he meant. Now I know he wasn't talking about finding silver linings or forcing positive thinking. He was talking about the profound human capacity to transform suffering into wisdom, pain into compassion, hardship into purpose. As we come to the end of our time together, I want to leave you with this thought. Your hardships have not happened to you by accident. They're not random, cruel acts of an indifferent universe. They're invitations to become more than you are right now. Every challenge you face is asking you a question. Will you let this break you down, or will you let it break you open? The choice is yours. You can't always choose what happens to you, but you can always choose what you do with what happens to you. You can choose to view your hardships not as punishments to endure, but as opportunities to evolve. You can choose to let your struggles make you bitter or better, closed or more open, harder or more tender. And perhaps most importantly, you can choose to use your hardships as a way to connect more deeply with others who are suffering. Because in the end, the most fulfilling life isn't one free from hardship. It's one in which our hardships become bridges of understanding and compassion. Remember, everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Your transformed hardships might be exactly what someone else needs to find hope in their darkness. Your hard-won wisdom might be the light that helps another person find their way. Your story of resilience might be the inspiration someone else needs to keep going. This is the ultimate alchemy of hardship transformed into fulfillment. When our personal pain becomes a source of healing for others, when our individual struggles become a bridge to deeper human connection, when our hardships become the very things that make our lives rich with meaning and purpose. So I invite you to look at your hardships with new eyes. Ask yourself, what if this challenge isn't happening to me, but for me? What if this difficulty isn't blocking my path to fulfillment, but is my path to fulfillment? What if my hardships aren't breaking me down, but breaking me open? Because in the end, a fulfilling life isn't measured by how much pain we avoid, but by how much wisdom we gain, how much compassion we develop, and how much light we bring to others through our own transformed darkness. Your hardships have given you gifts, gifts of understanding, gifts of strength, gifts of wisdom. The question is, what will you do with these gifts? How will you use your transformed pain to bring more light into the world? The answer to that question is your path to fulfillment. And it begins now. With whatever challenge you're facing today, trust that your hardships are leading you somewhere important. Trust that your pain has purpose. Trust that through the very experiences you might wish to avoid, you're being shaped into someone capable of bringing more wisdom, more compassion, and more healing into the world. This is how hardships lead to a fulfilling life, not by breaking us down, but by breaking us open to become more than we ever imagined we could be.